Clive Anderson poses the question, what if Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky have never met?
Good evening and welcome to What If? And tonight, what if Bill Clinton had never met Monica Lewinsky? If William Jefferson Clinton had kept his eye on the ball and his hands off the staff, would he go down in history as one of America's great presidents? Would Al Gore be president today? Would American foreign policy have gone in a completely different direction? And would George W. Bush be just another also-ran? To discuss these questions, I'm joined by Daily Telegraph columnist Janet Daly, who is an American who has lived in this country since the 1960s. In her youth, she was a left-wing radical at Berkeley University, but was converted to conservative politics while living in the People's Republic of Haringey in North London. And Jeff McAllister, who was appointed Time magazine's London bureau chief in 1999. In a distinguished career, Jeff has covered American diplomacy all around the world and the major events of Bill Clinton's White House. Martin Kettle writes for The Guardian and during the years 1997 to 2001 was their Washington correspondent. And if you want to refresh your memory about tonight's What If moment while you're watching, just press the red button on your remote control. But before we rewrite history, let's turn the clock back to the mid-1990s when Bill Clinton was finding ways of enjoying his time in office. It's June 1995 and the 22-year-old Monica Lewinsky starts work in the Clinton White House. The president is attracted by her big eyes, big hair and big personality. They indulge in several months of sexual encounters in the back room of the Oval Office. When his mind is on the job and not on the job, Clinton comes through a rocky first term as president and hits the campaign trail in 1996 with renewed vigor. In comparison, his Republican opponent, Senator Bob Dole, looks old and feeble. Clinton coasts to an easy victory. For his second four-year term, Clinton rededicates himself to a less ambitious and more centrist agenda, building on compromise with the Republican majority in Congress. But the spirit of cooperation is short-lived when 1 year in, sensational revelations about his affair with Monica are splashed across the front pages. Clinton denies the allegations with consummate sincerity.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky.
So then, Jeff McAllister, I suppose in one sense nothing flows from this because he survived his 2 terms, but is the first damage from him meeting Monica damage to his reputation as a president?
Well, what will be the first line in every obituary of Bill Clinton? I'm afraid he's a marked man for the rest of his life, and he has to feel that all this promise, all this fantastic talent that he truly does have was squandered fundamentally. And I think he feels that way. I think he's trying to rehabilitate his reputation to some degree now, but it's not working that well.
Well, he's obviously got a great talent as a communicator. He communicates on a sort of male level, a rational level, and an emotional level. But does he have a talent for administration and analysis and changing the world, changing the country as well, would you say?
Well, he was stuck in lots of his presidency with divided Congress and some incapacity to get very much accomplished. I would say, though, at all those levels, the intellectual, the emotional, the policy analyst, he's probably better than any president in the 20th century in combining all those qualities. I mean, everyone who ever worked for him said he can do 6 things at once, and one will be reading. I remember talking to his chief counsel saying, well, Clinton was doing 7 other things, watching television and having a lot of people in the office, and he said, I don't want you to read this complicated memo, Mr. President, because you're not going to get it right. And Clinton just went through it, and he said, okay, give me a test. And he knew every single thing in it. He knew all the complicated sub-clauses and different recommendations.
Unfortunately, one of the things he was doing at the time was having sex or not sex or quasi-sex with Monica. But I mean, okay, we're talking about Monica, but Janet, of course, there were other women in his life, and I suppose, I don't want to undercut the whole base of the programme, but I suppose, again, you could argue, if it wasn't Monica, it would have been some somebody else or some other scandal.
There's quite a lot of evidence that he met quite a few people in that capacity. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons that it didn't destroy him, is that we already knew about Jennifer Flowers. We already knew that he had a pretty dodgy history in this respect. So I don't think when the scandal came out, the fact that he lied was much more serious politically. And the fact that's what he was going to be impeached for. It wasn't a question of having sex with a very young intern. She wasn't underage. There was nothing illegal about what he did. The point was, it was sordid.
It wasn't very heroic.
It was sordid. It was messy. But it wasn't. I mean, no pun intended. But I mean, but it wasn't. There was nothing impeachable about the act. What was impeachable was that he lied. But can I just make the point? I just want to respond to your point about how much he accomplished. I mean, a lot of what he accomplished was by default. I mean, he was forced to sign a budget by the Republican Houses of Congress. He was forced, in fact, to put an end to welfare by the Republican Congress. A lot of the things that he accomplished in terms of ensuring the stability of the economy were against his best judgment. They weren't what he wanted.
Against his initial judgment, I agree. I think it's very interesting. He actually had lots of other girlfriends, and he must have treated them pretty well, because
they didn't rat.
Yeah, they didn't rat. Actually, I think.
Well, maybe they just had better dry cleaners.
Or better lawyers. I don't know.
So where do you stand on this? Do you think we've got a great president here who's let down by his little peccadillos, or is he somebody who was really not achieving much anyway and was forced into taking some better decisions by Republican members of Congress?
Well, I think there are two things. I think it's undoubtedly true that Clinton was the sort of perfect polity wonk president for the 21st century. He had a mastery, and has a mastery, of detail and policy options, which, you know, does put the present President of the United States a bit in the shade, but also most other politicians in the modern world that one's ever come across. On the other hand, I think the really important thing to remember about Clinton all the time is that his victory in 1992 really offended the Republicans, really offended conservative America, and especially after the midterm elections in 1994, when they came back, controlled the Congress, you know, with a very coherent right-wing program. They were really out to get Clinton, and they failed to nail him in '96. And there was there was huge bitterness, a real division between these two cultures, really, that split America right down the middle, and in some ways still does.
Well, Bill and Hillary both seem to say, well, they said in terms that there was a conspiracy against him and trying to get him down, which you're kind of confirming, but he did leave them the material in which to operate this conspiracy on, not just the sexual scandal. I know he was acquitted ultimately of the financial scandals, but there seems to be a sort of slight whiff of not quite proper behaviour.
Well, anybody who knows Arkansas, you know, and anybody who knows the American South, and anybody who knows the sort of politics that he came out of, the sort of swamp that he came out of, it would be very surprising if he hadn't been involved in quite a few sort of messy.
Yes,
I think that's one bit of the anti-Clinton obsession. Is that he's sort of white trash, from the wrong side of the tracks. I know you didn't. But
you do think you're watching the Jerry Springer show sometimes when you're looking at that Star inquiry and going to those sort of details. Is that a fair commentary, or is this a conspiracy against the boy from a small state?
I think there was something to the conspiracy, to the scandal machine. But as you say, if Clinton hadn't lied under oath in the deposition, in this case, which in another era would not have been possible because there weren't sexual harassment laws, then he would have gotten away with it.
Is there something in the theory which I would advance? He always reminds me. I used to be a lawyer myself, and he always reminds me of a sort of juvenile client. If you had, they would never plead guilty because they didn't want to admit it to their parents, or usually their mother. And maybe he could have just said, "Yes, okay, so I had sort of sex with this," but he didn't want to admit it to Hillary. Was he frightened of her, or was that again a sort of stereotypical image we've got of him and her?
I think when you get asked questions like this in the middle of a deposition that you're not expecting, this is not the time for you to all of a sudden calculate your relationship with your wife and the future of the republic. You just say the first thing that comes to your mind. And I think his whole career, you saw with the draft dodging in '92 and Jennifer Flowers and lots of other things, he always managed to get away with it. And
he called himself the comeback kid. Yes. How many times did he go down, and how many times did he come back?
I don't know. All these expressions are awkward to deal with in this particular discussion. I think it was the other way around. But he did have the capacity. I mean, we played that clip, that famous clip of him saying, with that sincere voice, I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
I would say he truly believed it, because I think from every girlfriend that I've ever been able to talk to, and there are others
Yes. Oh, you've gone into this.
Yes,
yes.
It was always, frankly, oral sex in order, I think, to be able to look the cameras in the eye and say, I did not truly have sex with that woman.
Yes.
And I think he worked that out. He said it. I looked in the Bible and I figured this out. So I think that was the lawyer's mind combined with the self-indulgence.
Well, that was P.J. O'Rourke's opinion about the I didn't inhale the drugs thing. Is he was the person who wouldn't refuse the joint because that would look uncool, but he wouldn't actually inhale it because that would be something you'd have to deny.
I did not break the laws of my own country, which is what he said. Well, he did it in Oxford. I mean,
I mean, the guy is a real pussy. I mean, either you're going to do it and admit to it, or you're not going to do it and be honest and say that you didn't do it. I mean, it's really.
Let's see how the course of events might have changed. In January 1997, President Clinton becomes the first Democrat for 60 years to be elected to serve a second full term. But within a year, his affair with Monica Lewinsky is exposed as part of an investigation of a completely different financial scandal. Kenneth Starr is determined to get his man, and Clinton becomes the first president for more than a century to face impeachment. He's acquitted, and despite, or possibly because of the evidence of his sexual misbehavior, his popularity soars. On the world stage in 1993, he comes close to ending the Arab-Israeli impasse, but as so often before, the Middle East peace process stalls. Terrorists kill American soldiers in Somalia and bomb the US embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. Clinton responds by bombing a training camp in Afghanistan and what turns out to be an aspirin factory in the Sudan. And Clinton orders the bombing of Iraq to punish Saddam's defiance and authorizes bombing in Kosovo to prevent genocide. Well, before we come to the events of his second term, Janet, I suppose we could just pause and do another what-if. Supposing this scandal had come out before the 96 election, but maybe in the sort of heightened atmosphere of an election campaign, do you think that would have finished him off and we would have had President Dole instead of a second term from Clinton?
No, I don't think we would ever have had President Dole. He was the wrong man at the wrong time. He just looked... There are some people who are just not credible as presidential figures, and I think he was not. But I think...
But don't they become credible if they get elected and you start thinking, no? Not with
sorry, you've got to vote for them first, you see.
Yes, all right, OK.
What seems to have happened with Bill Clinton, actually, is that he seems to have been rescued by this scandal in the medium and long term. It was awful in the short term. But in fact, his popularity, I mean, I remember being in America at the time when the impeachment hearings were going on, and particularly among African-American voters, he was their guy. And the feeling was very much on the part of not only sort of ethnic minorities, but the core Democratic vote was that he just committed a minor offence, a misdemeanor. He was caught out. He was being got at by lots of right-wing establishment figures. I don't think it did him any harm at all, actually.
So there wasn't a feeling that he was caught lying, but rather that he was being picked on.
The business about being caught lying was the kind of right-wing, upper-middle-class argument that, the president shouldn't be allowed to get away with lying. But for the ordinary, blue-collar sort of constituency, which is the core Democratic constituency, they just felt, OK, he cheated on his wife, lots of people do that, I wouldn't want to get caught either, so big deal, he's still a fit president.
He's always incredibly fortunate in his enemies, I think.
Kenneth Starr looked a bit too dour.
Well, yes, but remember the name of Newt Gingrich, who I think needs a walk-on part in this discussion, because Gingrich very seriously overreached himself in, whenever it was, 1995, right at the time that Clinton first met Monica Lewinsky. In fact, it was when Gingrich had tried to shut the whole federal government down, and that backfired in a hugely beneficial way from Clinton's point of view. And Kenneth Starr also overplayed his hand, and that again really helped Clinton. Clinton may have been the comeback kid in his own terms, but he was fantastically well helped by his.
But what about his capacity actually to do the job? Because there he was, being president, the most powerful man in the world, and he was having to pop along to these hearings and justify his own sexual life. I mean, it's even suggested that he bombed Afghanistan and Sudan as a sort of distraction from the hearings that were going on. Is there anything in that?
I think there is something in that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that was all pretty carefully orchestrated and syncopated.
So there are people dead in those countries who would still be alive, but for this scandal having taken place.
I take the absolute opposite view. I covered that extremely closely with all the national security people from bottom to top. And of course, the president fundamentally made the decision in the end. But this was a very strongly felt belief in the national security bureaucracy. All those people who searching for Osama bin Laden, as they still are, thought it was time, and that and this guy was dangerous, and they had to do it, and this was the time to do it.
Would you say that he was weakened as a president in his second term by, if not adjusting his decisions, but not being able to concentrate on world politics instead of his personal life?
Who knows? Foreign policy doesn't win or lose elections in America. It's very much domestic policy that does that. And I think, and the reputation of the president, because the president, there is a very big personality cult thing about presidents in America.
Well, you can talk about American domestic policy if you like. I mean, was he able to drive through his domestic policies?
No.
He didn't have much of one.
No, he didn't.
That was the problem.
No. Well, reforming healthcare, which was a complete washout.
I'm talking about the second term. I mean, he did important things. There was welfare. There was, of course, a huge boom in the economy. I mean, lots of sort of good things happened on his watch. He did want to do more with student scholarships. He had a few ideas for sort of tinkering around the edges. But I remember